The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrison, but according to this will, you've been left nothing." I sat frozen in the leather chair across from Attorney Mitchell's mahogany desk, my hands gripping the armrests so tight my knuckles had gone pale. Outside the window, Chicago's downtown bustled with life, people rushing to lunch meetings, taxis honking, the world spinning like nothing had just shattered mine into a million pieces. But inside this office, time had stopped. "That's impossible," I whispered, though even as I said it, a sick feeling was spreading through my stomach. My father would never. "The will is dated 3 months before his passing," Mr. Mitchell continued, his kind eyes full of pity I didn't want. He slid the document across the desk. "It leaves the family business, the house in Lincoln Park, and all liquid assets to Diane Harrison, your stepmother, to be distributed to her children, Brandon and Courtney Fletcher, upon her death." My eyes scanned the pages, but the words blurred together. 28 years. That's how long I'd been my father's daughter. 15 of those years I'd shared him with Diane, the woman he married when I was 13, 2 years after my mother died. Diane had come into our lives like a summer storm, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to prepare for. This signature. I pointed at my father's name scrawled at the bottom. Something about it looked wrong. The loops were too perfect, too careful. Dad always signed his name in a rush, the H in Harrison barely legible because he was always busy, always moving, always building his empire. "Miss Harrison, I understand this is difficult. When was this will supposedly written?" I cut him off. He checked the date again. "March 15th. 3 months before your father's passing in June." March 15th. I remembered that date for a different reason. That was the day Dad had his first heart attack. I'd spent that entire day and night at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding his hand, terrified I'd lose him. Diane had been there too, playing the devoted wife, but she'd left early, claiming she needed to take care of things at home. "Who witnessed this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Mitchell flipped through the pages. "A notary named Robert Chong, and, it appears, Brandon Fletcher witnessed it as well." Brandon. My stepbrother. The entitled, lazy 30-year-old who'd never worked a real day in his life but always had his hand out for Dad's money. Of course he'd witnessed a will that gave him everything. "Mr. Mitchell, this isn't right." I stood up, pacing to the window. The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger, a beautiful woman they'd always said, with deep brown skin, natural curls falling past my shoulders, and eyes that my father used to say could see through any lie. But right now those eyes just looked lost. My father and I talked about the business constantly. He was training me to take over. I have an MBA from Northwestern. I've been working at Harrison Industries since I graduated 6 years ago. Why would he cut me out completely? "I'm simply executing the will as it's written, Ms. Harrison. If you believe there's been an error or something inappropriate, you'll need to hire your own attorney to contest it." Contest it? The words felt both like a lifeline and like admitting defeat. If I contested the will, it would become public. Messy. Everyone would know that my father apparently hadn't loved me enough to leave me anything. Or worse, they'd think I was a greedy daughter fighting over money. But this wasn't about money. This was about the truth. "I need copies of everything," I said firmly. "Every page of this will, every document related to the estate. And I need the contact information for this notary, Robert Chong." Mr. Mitchell hesitated. "Ms. Harrison, I have a right to documentation regarding my father's estate, even if I'm not a beneficiary. You know that." He nodded slowly and began making copies. As the machine hummed, memories flooded back. Dad teaching me to ride a bike in Lincoln Park. Dad walking me through the factory floor, explaining every detail of how his manufacturing company worked. Dad at my college graduation, tears in his eyes, telling me I was his greatest achievement. "I love you more than anything in this world, Simone," he'd said that day. "Everything I built for you. Never forget that." How could that man have written this will? The answer was simple: he didn't. As I left the office building, the June sun beating down on the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my best friend Nicole, who answered on the second ring. "Simone, how'd it go with the lawyer?" I couldn't speak at first. The words were stuck in my throat, tangled up with rage and grief and disbelief. "That bad?" Nicole's voice softened. "I'm coming over." "No," I said finally. "I need you to help me find a good private investigator. The best in Chicago." "What? Why?" "Because Diane just stole my entire life and I'm going to prove it." The second call was to my office at Harrison Industries, or what used to be my office. I'd been on bereavement leave since Dad's death 6 weeks ago, But I was supposed to return next Monday. Supposed to step into a leadership role. Supposed to continue my father's legacy. The receptionist answered cheerfully. Harrison Industries, how may I direct your call? Hi Tanya, it's Simone. Can you transfer me to? I stopped. Who was I even supposed to talk to? If Diane owned everything now, she could fire me before I even walked back through those doors. Actually, never mind. Thank you. I hung up and stood on the corner of LaSalle and Monroe, watching the city move around me. Somewhere in this city, Diane was probably celebrating. Brandon and Courtney were probably already spending money they thought was theirs. They'd replaced me in my father's will, in his house, in his business. They thought they'd erased me completely. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was weak. That I'd accept this quietly and disappear. That I'd be too heartbroken or too naive to fight back. They were wrong. I wasn't my mother, who died quietly of cancer, too kind to burden anyone with her pain. I wasn't the 13-year-old girl who'd let Diane move into her house and take over her life without protest. I was Simone Harrison, daughter of Robert Harrison, the man who'd built an empire from nothing. And he taught me everything he knew about fighting for what was mine. As I walked toward the L station, a plan began forming in my mind. I'd need evidence. Documentation. Proof that this will was a fraud. I'd need to move carefully, quietly, so Diane wouldn't see me coming until it was too late. I'd need to become the thing she never expected. A threat. The train rushed into the station, brakes squealing. As I stepped on board and found a seat, I caught my reflection in the window again. This time I looked different. My jaw was set. My eyes were hard. I looked like someone who knew exactly what she had to do. And I did. Diane had started this war when she forged my father's signature and stole my inheritance. But I was going to finish it. Whatever it took. Jerome Carter's office was nothing like I expected. From Nicole's glowing recommendation, he found my ex-husband's secret accounts in 3 days. I'd pictured something sleek and modern. Instead, I found myself in a converted loft in Pilsen, sitting on a worn leather couch across from a man who looked more like a college professor than a private investigator. Your father's will, Jerome said, studying the copies I'd brought. He was maybe 40, with deep brown skin, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an intensity that made me feel like he could see through walls. You think it's forged? I know it is. I leaned forward. My father had a heart attack the day this will was supposedly signed. He was in the hospital all day. I was with him. Hospital records will show that. Jerome made a note on his tablet. That's good. What else? The signature is wrong. Too neat. My father's signature was always rushed, messy. This looks practiced. I'll need to compare it to other documents. Do you have access to anything else he signed? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Business contracts, birthday cards, his passport from our last trip together. All within the past year. Jerome's eyebrows raised slightly. You came prepared. My father taught me to never walk into a negotiation without leverage. A small smile crossed his face. Tell me about your stepmother. Where did I even start? Diane married my father 15 years ago. I was 13. My mother had died 2 years before cancer. Dad was lonely and Diane was charming, beautiful, attentive. She had 2 kids from her first marriage. Brandon was 15, Courtney was 10. How was the marriage? I thought about that question. How had it really been? Good at first, I think. Or maybe I was just too young to see the cracks. Diane was nice to me when Dad was around. But when he traveled for business, which was often, things changed. Nothing dramatic. Just small things. She'd forget to pick me up from school. She'd make dinner plans with Brandon and Courtney without including me. She'd buy them new clothes and tell me we needed to save money. Your father didn't notice? I never told him. I looked down at my hands. He was so happy to have a family again. And I told myself I was being oversensitive. That I was jealous of having to share him. So I worked harder to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect daughter, perfect employee at his company after college. I thought if I proved myself valuable enough, I'd always have a place. But after he died? It was like a switch flipped. The day after the funeral, Diane told me I needed to move out of the house where I grew up, where my mother died, where every room held memories of my father. She said it was too difficult to have me there. That she needed space to grieve with her children. Jerome's jaw tightened. Where are you staying now? An apartment in Wicker Park. Month-to-month lease. Everything I own is still in boxes because I kept thinking this had to be a misunderstanding. That once we got through probate, I'd have my home back. And the business? Harrison Industries. My father started it 30 years ago, manufacturing industrial parts. It's worth 20 million, maybe more. He'd been training me to take over. I have an office there, a title, responsibilities. Or I did. I'm supposed to return from bereavement leave on Monday, but now. I spread my hands helplessly. If Diane owns it, she can fire me the minute I walk through the door. Jerome nodded slowly, taking notes. Ms. Harrison. Simone. Please. Simone. I need you to be realistic about what we're up against. Contesting a will is hard. Proving forgery is harder. Your stepmother had the will notarized. She has witnesses. Even if we can prove your father was in the hospital that day, she could argue he signed it before the heart attack or after he was released. So what do? We look for everything. Bank records, emails, phone records, witnesses who can speak to your father's intentions and his relationship with you. We find out who this notary Robert Chang is and whether he actually witnessed anything. We look into your stepmother's finances before and after the marriage. We build a timeline. And we find the truth. He stood up and walked to a whiteboard on the wall, picking up a marker. But I need to warn you, this won't be quick and it won't be cheap. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my bank account. I'd been making good money at Harrison Industries, but I'd also been living like I had family wealth to fall back on. Nice apartment, nice car, nice clothes. Now all of that felt precarious. I'll pay whatever it takes, I said firmly. And I'll help however I can. Good. Because I'm going to need you to do something that might be difficult. What? I need you to go back to your father's house. The one your stepmother kicked you out of. I need you to search for anything your father might have left behind. Letters, documents, backup files, anything that might show his real intentions. My stomach turned. Diane lives there. She'll never let me in. Does she work? She volunteers at some charity events, goes to lunch with friends. She's never worked a real job in her life. Find out her schedule. Find a time when she's gone. You have a right to collect your personal belongings, things from your childhood, photos of your mother. Use that as your excuse if anyone asks. But while you're there, look for everything. It felt wrong sneaking into what used to be my own home. But Jerome was right. If there was evidence, it would be there. That weekend, I did what he suggested. I called Courtney, pretending to be conciliatory, asking if I could stop by to get some of my mother's jewelry that was still in my old bedroom. Courtney, predictably, was suspicious but agreed, probably hoping I'd cause a scene she could use against me later. Diane's at some luncheon on Saturday, Courtney said coldly. Come at 2. And make it quick. Saturday arrived cold and rainy, typical Chicago spring weather. I parked down the street from the house in Lincoln Park, a beautiful graystone my father had bought when I was 5. Every brick, every window held memories. My mother planting roses in the front garden. My father teaching me to ride a bike on the sidewalk. Birthday parties. Holidays. A lifetime of love. Now it felt like a stranger's house. Courtney answered the door, her expression sour. At 23 she looked older than she should, probably from years of entitled bitterness. 30 minutes, she said. That's all you get. She didn't follow me upstairs, which was my first stroke of luck. My old bedroom looked different. Courtney had taken it over, filling it with her things. But the closet still had some of my mother's jewelry boxes on the top shelf where I'd stored them years ago. I grabbed them quickly, then moved to what I was really looking for, my father's office. The door was locked, but I knew where Dad kept the spare key. He'd shown me when I was 16, telling me, just in case you ever need to find something important, baby girl. You're the only one I trust with this. The key was still there, taped under the hallway smoke detector. Inside the office, everything was exactly as Dad had left it. His desk. His computer, probably password protected. His filing cabinets. I didn't have much time. I grabbed my phone and started photographing everything I could, papers on his desk, the filing cabinet labels, his calendar from the months before he died. Then I saw them. Boxes in the corner, labeled in my father's handwriting, Simone's Documents College, Simone's Documents Business, and simply, important. My hands shook as I opened the important box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Letters from my father to me, most never sent. I scanned the dates. They were recent, written in the last year of his life. One was dated March 1st, 2 weeks before the heart attack. My dearest Simone, it began. I couldn't read it all then, not with Courtney downstairs and time running out. But I saw enough to make my heart race. If anything happens to me, you must know that everything I've built is meant for you. I've made arrangements. Don't trust Diane. I've made a terrible mistake. I photographed every page, my hands shaking so badly I had to steady myself against the desk. There was more. Financial documents showing large withdrawals from personal accounts over the past 2 years. Emails printed out, exchanges between my father and his lawyer, not Mr. Mitchell but someone else, someone named Theodore Walsh. Dates and times that told a story I was only beginning to understand. Simone. Courtney's voice came from downstairs. Time's up. I shoved the letters back into the box, locked the office and replaced the key. By the time I made it downstairs, I was clutching my mother's jewelry boxes like they were the only things I'd come for. Courtney looked at me with disgust. Got what you came for? Good. Don't come back. As I walked to my car in the rain, the jewelry boxes in one hand and my phone full of evidence in the other, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Oh, Dad had known. He'd known Diane couldn't be trusted. And somewhere in those documents was proof of what he really wanted. I just had to find it. The name Theodore Walsh led me to a small law office in Evanston. I showed up without an appointment on Monday morning, the photos from Dad's office burning a hole in my phone. I'm sorry, the receptionist said kindly. Mr. Walsh passed away 8 months ago. His practice was dissolved. 8 months. Right before my father's heart attack. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Who handled his client files? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Everything was transferred to his partner, Eleanor Rodriguez. But she's not taking new clients right now. She's actually retiring next month. I pulled out my business card, one of the last ones I had from Harrison Industries. Please. My father was Robert Harrison. He was one of Mr. Walsh's clients. This is urgent. Something shifted in the receptionist's expression. Recognition maybe, or sympathy. Wait here. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Eleanor Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who studied me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. You look just like your father, she said finally. Same determination in your eyes. Theodore spoke about you often. You knew my father? I met him a few times when he came to see Theodore. They were working on estate planning. Your father was very specific about his wishes. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Miss Harrison, I'm going to be direct with you. Theodore's death was unexpected, a car accident. Several of his active cases became complicated because of it. Your father's was one of them. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Your father came to Theodore in January, 5 months before he passed. He wanted to update his will. He was very clear that everything was to go to you, the business, the house, all of it. Diane and her children were to receive a modest settlement, nothing more. The words hit me like a physical blow. Then why is there a will dated March leaving everything to them? Eleanor's expression darkened. That's what I'd like to know. Theodore was drafting your father's new will when he died in February. After the accident, I tried to contact your father to finish the process, but I was told he was unavailable. I spoke to someone named Diane Harrison who said Robert was dealing with health issues and wasn't taking calls. Diane answered? Yes. She was very polite, very concerned. She said she'd have Robert call me back once he was feeling better. He never did. Then I heard about his passing in June, and I reached out to his estate attorney, a Mr. Mitchell, to offer the information about the will Theodore had been working on. But Mitchell told me everything was already settled, that there was a will dated after our last meeting with Robert. A forged will. Eleanor nodded slowly. I can't make that accusation legally. But I can tell you what I know. Your father was very worried about Diane's spending habits and her children's sense of entitlement. He told Theodore that he'd made a mistake marrying her, that he felt trapped. He wanted to protect you and his life's work. She pulled out a file folder and slid it across the desk. These are Theodore's notes from his meetings with your father. I've been holding on to them because something about this whole situation felt wrong. I think you should have them. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. There, in neat handwritten notes, was everything. Dates of meetings, my father's specific instructions, his concerns about Diane, his love for me documented in Theodore's careful handwriting. Can I use this in court? I asked. It's not a completed will, so it's not legally binding. But it shows intent. It shows your father's state of mind. Combined with other evidence, it could be powerful. I thanked her and left the office with the folder clutched to my chest, my mind spinning. I needed more. I needed something that would prove definitively that the March will was fake. That's when I remembered Aunt Patricia. My father's older sister had been a presence in my childhood, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts, calling occasionally. But after Dad married Diane, those calls had stopped. I'd assumed she was busy or that we'd grown apart. Now, I wondered if there was another reason. I found her number in an old address book I'd saved from my childhood bedroom. She lived in Phoenix now, retired after a career as a social worker. When she answered the phone, her voice was cautious. "Simone? Is that really you?" "Hi, Aunt Patricia. I'm sorry I haven't called in so long." "Oh honey, that's not your fault. I know Diane made sure of that." The words hung in the air between us. "What do you mean? Can we video chat? I think this is a conversation we need to have face to face." 20 minutes later we were on FaceTime. Patricia looked older than I remembered, her hair completely gray now, but her eyes were sharp and kind. When she saw me, tears filled her eyes. "You look so much like your mother. God, I've missed you." "I've missed you too. Aunt Patricia, I need to ask you something. About Dad's will." Her expression hardened. "That woman stole everything from you, didn't she?" "You knew." "I suspected. Your father called me 2 months before he died. He was worried. He said Diane had been acting strange, secretive. He'd found financial discrepancies in their personal accounts. He told me he was changing his will, making sure you got everything. He said he'd send me a copy for safekeeping just in case." My heart nearly stopped. "Did he send it?" Patricia nodded. "It arrived 3 weeks before his heart attack. I have it, Simone. The real will, dated February 28th, signed and notarized by Theodore Walsh's office." I couldn't breathe. "You have it? The real will?" "Yes. And there's more. Your father wrote me letters over the years, especially after he married Diane. He documented everything, how she slowly pushed me away, how she intercepted my calls and emails to you, how she manipulated situations to make it seem like you didn't want contact with his side of the family. He knew what she was doing, but he didn't realize how far she'd go until it was almost too late. Why didn't you come to the funeral? Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Patricia's face crumpled. "I tried, baby. I flew to Chicago the day I heard about your father's passing. But when I got to the house, Diane told me the funeral was private, family only. She said you specifically didn't want me there, that you blamed the Harrison side of the family for abandoning you." "That's a lie. I never said that. I know that now. But at the time I was so hurt. I flew home and didn't even get to say goodbye to my brother. Then I got a call from Mr. Mitchell about the will reading, and I told him about the will I had. He seemed surprised, but he said he'd look into it. When I never heard back, I assumed everything had been sorted out legally. I didn't know you'd been cut out until you called today." I was crying now, angry tears that blurred my vision. "Diane has been isolating me from everyone who loved me for 15 years. She planned this. All of it." "Yes," Patricia said firmly. "And now we're going to stop her. I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow. I'm bringing the real will, all of your father's letters, and every piece of evidence I have. And then we're going to make this right." That night, I met with Jerome at his office and showed him everything. Eleanor's notes, the photos from Dad's office, the news about Patricia and the real will. He studied it all with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. "This is good," he said finally. "This is really good. With Patricia's will and the documentation of your father's intent, we have a strong case. But we still need to prove the March will is forged. How do we do that? We start with the notary, Robert Chong. I've been looking into him. Want to know something interesting? He died 4 months ago. Car accident." The words sent ice through my veins. "Just like Theodore Walsh." "Just like Theodore Walsh," Jerome confirmed. 2 men connected to your father's estate planning, both dead in accidents within months of each other. Could be coincidence. You don't believe that? No, I don't. Which is why tomorrow, you and I are going to visit Mr. Chang's widow and ask her some questions about her husband's notary work. As I left Jerome's office that night, walking through the cool Chicago evening toward my car, I felt the pieces starting to come together. Diane hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd orchestrated a massive fraud that might have involved multiple deaths. She'd isolated me from my family, poisoned relationships, and tried to erase me from my own father's life. But she'd made mistakes. She'd left evidence. And now that evidence was going to destroy her. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Booked my flight. Arriving tomorrow at noon. We're going to fight for what's yours, baby girl. Your daddy would be so proud of you." I smiled through my tears. For the first time since sitting in Mr. Mitchell's office, I didn't feel alone. I had family. Real family. People who loved me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. And together we were going to make sure Diane paid for every lie she'd ever told. Robert Chang's widow lived in a modest bungalow in Bridgeport, a neighborhood that felt worlds away from Diane's luxury in Lincoln Park. Mrs. Chang answered the door with tired eyes and a wary expression that softened when Jerome introduced us. "You're investigating Robert's death?" she asked, ushering us into a living room filled with photos of her late husband and their 3 children. "Not exactly," Jerome said gently. "We're investigating a document he allegedly notarized. Did your husband ever mention a client named Diane Harrison?" Mrs. Chang's face went pale. "The woman who got him killed." The words hung in the air like smoke. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Robert was a notary for 30 years. He was careful, meticulous. He kept records of everything he notarized, who, what, when, where. It was his job." She pulled out a worn ledger from a drawer. "This is his log from the last 6 months of his life. Look at March 15th. I scanned the page. March 15th showed 3 notarizations that day, none of them for anyone named Harrison or Fletcher. The last entry was at 2 p.m., hours before the time stamped on the fake will. He didn't notarize any will that day," Mrs. Chang continued, her voice shaking. "But 2 weeks before he died, a woman came to our door. Blonde, expensive clothes, driving a luxury car. She offered Robert $50,000 to say he'd notarized a document that day. She showed him a will with his stamp on it, his actual stamp, which had been stolen from his office 6 months earlier." "Did he report the theft?" Jerome asked. "Yes, to the police and to the state licensing board. We thought it was just random office theft. We never imagined someone would use it for fraud." She wiped her eyes. "Robert refused the money. He told the woman he'd report her. She smiled, he said that smile scared him, and she left. 3 days later, his car went off the road on his way home from work. The police said it was an accident, that he'd been drinking. But Robert never drank. Not once in 40 years of marriage." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so ugly I could barely look at it. "Did you tell the police about this woman?" "Of course. But there was no evidence. No surveillance footage of her visit, no record of her identity. And when the police investigated Robert's death, they found an open bottle of whiskey in his car. Someone put it there. Someone killed my husband and made it look like an accident." She pulled out a folder. "But Robert was smart. Before he died, he wrote down everything about that meeting, the woman's description, the date she came, the document she showed him. He gave it to me and told me to keep it safe. He said if anything happened to him, I should find the person she was trying to hurt and tell them the truth." Jerome took the folder carefully. Inside was a statement, written in Robert Chang's neat handwriting, detailing everything his widow had just told us. At the bottom was a description. Blonde woman, approximately 45 to 50 years old, 5 feet 7 inches, expensive designer clothing, drove a black Mercedes SUV, license plate started with DFL. Diane's car. Diane's description. Diane's initials on the plate. Diane Fletcher Lincoln, her maiden name that she'd incorporated into her married name like it was some kind of trophy. "Did Robert make copies of his notary log?" I asked. "He backed everything up digitally. I have the files." Mrs. Chang looked at me with something like relief in her eyes. "I've been carrying this weight for months, not knowing what to do with the information. When you called Mr. Carter asking about Robert's notary work, I thought maybe finally someone would listen. We left an hour later with copies of everything, the log, the statement, the backup files. As we drove back to Jerome's office, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "She killed him," I said. "Diane killed Robert Chang. And probably Theodore Walsh too. We don't have proof of that yet," Jerome cautioned. "But we have enough to prove the will is fraudulent. That's what matters right now. How can you be so calm? She's a murderer." "I'm not calm. I'm focused. And you need to be too, Simone. We're going to take everything we have to your new attorney and build an airtight case. But we need to be smart. If Diane suspects we're onto her, she could destroy evidence or worse." The thought sent ice through my veins. "Worse? You're a threat to her now. The only thing standing between her and complete control of your father's fortune. Promise me you'll be careful. Vary your routes home, check your car before you drive it, tell me if anything feels off." I wanted to say he was being paranoid, but Mrs. Chang's haunted eyes kept flashing in my mind. Robert Chang had refused to lie and he died for it. Later that day I met Patricia at O'Hare Airport. When I saw her standing at the arrivals gate looking around for me, something in my chest broke open. I ran to her and she wrapped me in her arms like I was 13 again and had just lost my mother. "Oh baby girl," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let her keep us apart. It's not your fault. It's hers. All of it." We went back to my tiny apartment, and Patricia spread out everything she'd brought on my kitchen table. The real will, dated February 28th, naming me as sole beneficiary. Letters from my father, documenting his concerns about Diane. Photos of our family, my grandparents, cousins, uncles and aunts I barely remembered. A whole family tree that Diane had carefully pruned me out of. Your father's parents, your grandparents, they died while you were young, Patricia explained. But you have cousins in Boston, an uncle in Atlanta, aunts in California. Diane made sure none of us could reach you. She intercepted mail, blocked phone numbers, told your father we weren't interested in maintaining contact with his new family. She poisoned every relationship systematically. I thought about all the holidays spent with just Diane, Brandon, and Courtney while Dad worked late. All the birthdays where no cards came from the Harrison side. I thought they'd forgotten me. But they hadn't. They'd been kept away. Why did Dad believe her? I asked. Patricia's face softened with sadness. Your father was brilliant at business but naive about people he loved. He wanted so badly to believe he'd found a new family for you after your mother died. And Diane was smart. She never made him choose directly. She just made it easier to distance from us than to fight to keep us close. And your father was always traveling, always working. By the time he realized what she was doing, the damage was done. But he tried to fix it at the end. Yes. He called me in January crying. He said he'd been such a fool, that he'd let Diane turn you into a stranger in your own home. He said he was changing everything, making it right. He was going to ask for a divorce after the will was updated. He was going to expose what Diane had been doing. He was going to bring our families back together. And then he'd had a heart attack in March. Convenient timing for Diane. You don't think? I couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia's jaw tightened. I think your father was a healthy 60-year-old man who suddenly had a massive heart attack right before he was going to divorce his wife and cut her out of his will. Do I have proof of anything? No. But my brother knew what he was doing when he sent me that will for safekeeping. The next day, Patricia and I met with Vanessa Pierce, the estate attorney Jerome had recommended. Vanessa was exactly what I needed, sharp, no nonsense, and clearly furious on my behalf as we laid out the evidence. This is one of the most egregious cases of estate fraud I've seen, Vanessa said, studying the documents. We have your father's intent clearly documented through Theodore Walsh's notes. We have the real will with Patricia as a witness. We have proof the notary stamp was stolen and that Robert Chang never notarized the March will. We have evidence of financial manipulation. This is solid. So we can win? I asked. We can win. But it's going to be ugly. Diane's lawyers will fight every step. They'll try to discredit you, Patricia, everyone. They'll drag your father's name through the mud. They'll paint you as a greedy daughter who can't accept that her father chose his wife over her. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the past 15 years. The small cruelties. The isolation. The way Diane had systematically erased me from my own family. The way she'd stolen not just my inheritance but years of my life. I'm prepared, I said firmly. File the lawsuit. Jerome had been working another angle while we built the legal case. He'd traced Diane's finances and found something interesting. Large cash deposits into her personal account over the past 3 years, totaling nearly $500,000. Money that didn't come from my father's accounts or any legitimate source. I think she's been planning this for a while, Jerome explained at our meeting that evening. She's been siphoning money from somewhere, probably the business, and hiding it. She knew eventually your father would notice, so she needed to act fast. Can we trace where the money came from? I'm working on it. But I need access to Harrison Industries' financial records. As the rightful heir per the real will, you might be able to petition for an audit. Vanessa nodded. I'll file for that along with the lawsuit. We'll request a full forensic audit of the company finances. The lawsuit was filed on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was exploding with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Diane's lawyers probably. I didn't answer. Let them scramble. But then a call came through from Nicole. Simone, are you okay? I just heard that you're suing your stepmother? It's all over the business community. People are talking. Of course they were. Robert Harrison's daughter fighting for his estate. It would be juicy gossip for weeks. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine. I'm fighting back. Good. Because I always knew that woman was poison. By Thursday, the local news had picked up the story. Daughter alleges estate fraud in death of manufacturing magnate Robert Harrison. The article was surprisingly balanced, mentioning both sides of the dispute. But seeing my father's name in the news, linked to words like fraud and forgery, made me sick. Friday morning, I received an email from Brandon. Just 2 words, "You'll lose." I smiled and deleted it. He had no idea what was coming. That weekend, Vanessa called with news. Judge Martinez has agreed to an expedited hearing given the suspicious circumstances around the will. We're in court in 2 weeks for preliminary arguments. Be ready. I was ready. More than ready. I'd been preparing for this fight my entire life without even knowing it. Every time Dad taught me about business strategy, about negotiation, about standing firm when someone tried to take what was yours, he'd been preparing me for this moment. Patricia stayed with me that weekend and we talked for hours about my father, about the family I'd never known, about what came next. "When this is over," Patricia said, "I want you to meet everyone. Your cousins, your aunts and uncles. We have family reunions every summer in Michigan. Your grandmother used to host them before she passed. We've kept the tradition going. Next summer you'll come. You'll meet everyone. You'll know what it's like to have a real family again." I could barely imagine it, but I wanted it. I wanted it so badly it hurt. Sunday evening, as Patricia prepared to fly back to Phoenix to arrange her extended stay in Chicago for the trial, she hugged me tight. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered. "Fighting like this, standing up for the truth. That's the Harrison way." After she left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence, legal documents and photos of family I was only beginning to know. My phone buzzed with another text from Nicole. "Dinner next week? I want to hear everything." I smiled. Another text came through, this one from Jerome. "The forensic accountant found something big in Harrison Industries books. Call me tomorrow." The pieces were falling into place. The truth was emerging from 15 years of lies. And somewhere in her mansion in Lincoln Park, Diane was probably realizing that she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd assumed I was weak, isolated, alone. She'd forgotten that I was Robert Harrison's daughter. And we never went down without a fight. The preliminary hearing was in 5 days, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to see Diane's face when she realized what was coming. I needed her to know that I knew everything. Jerome advised against it. Let the legal system handle it. Don't give her ammunition. Vanessa agreed. A confrontation could hurt our case. She could record you, twist your words. Patricia was more direct. Let the courts destroy her, baby. Don't get your hands dirty. But they didn't understand. This wasn't about the legal case anymore. This was about looking the woman who'd stolen my life in the eyes and letting her know that I'd figured out her game. So Saturday morning, I drove to Lincoln Park. The house looked the same as it always had, beautiful, imposing, expensive. The roses my mother planted were long dead, replaced by Diane's preferred hydrangeas. Even the flowers had been replaced. Brandon's car was in the driveway and Courtney's. Perfect. I wanted them all there. I didn't knock. I still had a key from my childhood, one I'd kept on my keychain more out of sentiment than intention. It worked. The door swung open and I walked into the house where I'd grown up like I owned it. Because legally, if Patricia's will held up, I did. Voices came from the kitchen. I followed them and found all 3 sitting at the breakfast table, the same table where Dad and I used to have pancakes on Sunday mornings. Diane was wearing expensive loungewear, her blonde hair perfectly styled even on a weekend morning. Brandon was scrolling through his phone, bored. Courtney was painting her nails. They looked up when I entered. The shock on their faces was worth every risk. "What are you doing here?" Diane's voice was sharp. "Get out. This is my house." "No," I said calmly, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "It's my father's house. Which means it's my house." Brandon stood up, trying to look threatening. "You heard her. Leave before we call the police." "Go ahead. Call them. I'd love to explain to the police why you're living in a house that was purchased with money stolen from its rightful owner." Diane's face remained composed, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear maybe. Or calculation. "I don't know what nonsense that lawyer of yours has been filling your head with, but the will is clear. Your father left everything to me." "The forged will is clear, you mean? The one you had made after you stole Robert Chang's notary stamp? The one you tried to bribe him to verify? The one he refused to lie about, so you had him killed?" The room went dead silent. Courtney stopped painting her nails. Brandon's face went pale. Diane's expression finally cracked. "That's slander," she said, but her voice shook. "You can't prove any of that." "Can't I?" I pulled out my phone and brought up a photo of Robert Chang's statement. "This is from the notary you claim verified Dad's will. Written before his accident. He describes you perfectly. Your car, your license plate, your threats. That's fabricated." But Diane's hands were trembling now. "Anyone could have made that up. Then explain the forensic analysis of the signature on the will. Dad's real signature versus the one on your document. Explain why the date on the will is the same day Dad was in the hospital with a heart attack. Explain Theodore Walsh's notes documenting Dad's real wishes. Explain the will he sent to Aunt Patricia for safekeeping, the real will that leaves everything to me. Brandon found his voice. What are you talking about? What real will? I turned to him. You witnessed a forged document, Brandon. That makes you complicit in fraud. The same goes for you, Courtney. You knew. You both knew this wasn't right, but you went along with it because you wanted the money. We didn't know anything, Courtney protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Mom said Dad changed his mind about you. That he was disappointed in how you turned out. And you believe that? After 28 years of him loving me, raising me, training me to take over his company, you believed he suddenly decided to cut me out completely? Silence. You believed it because you wanted to believe it, I continued. Because it benefited you. But here's what's going to happen now. In 5 days we go to court. I have evidence that will prove this will is fake. I have the real will. I have testimony from Dad's real attorney. I have financial records showing Diane has been embezzling from the company. I have everything. Diane stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Get out of my house. Make me. I stayed seated, calm. Call the police. Please. Let's have this conversation with witnesses. For a long moment we stared at each other. This woman who'd entered my life when I was 13. Who'd taken advantage of my father's grief and loneliness. Who'd spent 15 years systematically isolating me, replacing me, preparing to erase me completely. You can't win, Diane said finally. I have lawyers. Good lawyers. They'll tear you apart in court. Your lawyers can't change the facts. Dad wanted me to have everything. He wrote it down. He told people. He sent a copy to his sister for safekeeping because he didn't trust you. He knew what you were, Diane. At the end he finally saw through you. He loved me, Diane insisted, but there was desperation in her voice now. He chose me. He married me. He married someone who seemed kind when he was vulnerable. But you weren't kind. You were calculated. You saw a grieving widower with a fortune and a daughter who was too young to protect him. You isolated him from his family. You manipulated every situation. And when he finally figured out what you were doing, you had to act fast. I didn't, Diane started, then stopped herself. Didn't what? Didn't forge the will? Didn't steal the notary stamp? Didn't bribe Robert Chang? Didn't have him killed when he refused to lie for you? I leaned forward. The truth is coming out, Diane. All of it. And when it does, you won't just lose the money. You'll lose everything. Your reputation. Your freedom. Maybe even your children when they realize what you've made them part of. Brandon and Courtney exchanged looks. I could see the doubt creeping in, the reality setting in. They'd been so eager to accept their mother's lies because it meant they'd be rich. But murder? Fraud? That was different. This is insane, Brandon said, but he didn't sound certain anymore. Mom wouldn't, she wouldn't kill anyone. Ask her about Robert Chang, I said. Ask her about Theodore Walsh. Ask her about the convenient timing of Dad's heart attack right before he was going to divorce her. Robert had a heart condition. Diane shouted. The doctor said so. Dad never had a heart condition in his life. He had annual physicals. His doctor will testify to that. The color drained from Diane's face. She hadn't thought about the medical records. Hadn't planned for every angle. For all her scheming, she'd made mistakes. You need to leave, Diane said again, but this time she sounded defeated. Now. I stood up slowly, savoring the moment. I'll leave, but I want you to know something. Dad spent his last months realizing what a mistake he'd made. He spent his last months trying to fix it, trying to protect me from you. And even though he died before he could finish, he left enough evidence behind to destroy you. I walked toward the door, then turned back. See you in court, Diane. Bring your best lies. They won't be enough. As I walked out of that house, my house, if justice prevailed, I heard raised voices behind me. Brandon and Courtney confronting their mother. Good. Let them tear each other apart. Let the cracks show before we even got to court. My hands were shaking as I got into my car. I'd confronted her. I'd looked her in the eyes and let her know I was coming for everything she'd stolen. And her face, that fear, that panic, it was the first real satisfaction I'd felt in weeks. Jerome called before I even got home. Please tell me you didn't do what I think you just did. I don't know what you're talking about. Simone. Okay, yes, I confronted her. But Jerome, you should have seen her face. She knows we have her. She's scared. Which makes her dangerous. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind. The look on Diane's face. The doubt in Brandon's voice. The way Courtney had gone pale when I mentioned murder. I'd thrown down the gauntlet. There was no going back now. Around midnight my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Simone Harrison? A woman's voice, professional. Yes. This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about Robert Chang. My heart stopped. What about him? His widow came to see me this afternoon. She mentioned you'd been to visit her, asking questions about a document her husband allegedly notarized. She also told me about her husband's statement regarding a woman who tried to bribe him. Is this true? Yes. All of it. I'd like you to come to the station tomorrow and give a formal statement. Mrs. Chang's allegations are serious. If what she's saying is true, her husband's death may not have been an accident. It wasn't, I said firmly. And I have evidence. Bring it. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Can you do that? I'll be there. After I hung up, I called Jerome. Then Vanessa. Then Patricia. They all said the same thing. This was good. This was very good. If the police investigated Robert Chang's death as a potential homicide, it would blow Diane's case apart. But it also meant I just painted an even bigger target on my back. Monday morning, I walked into the police station with Jerome, carrying copies of everything we had. Detective Morrison was exactly what I expected, sharp-eyed, no nonsense, skeptical but willing to listen. I told her everything. About the forged will. About the stolen notary stamp. About Robert Chang's statement. About Theodore Walsh's suspicious death. About my father's sudden heart attack. She took notes, asked questions, pushed back on assumptions. But by the end, I could see she was taking it seriously. This is a complex case, she said finally. Estate fraud, possible homicide, conspiracy. If what you're alleging is true, we're looking at serious charges. But I need more than accusations. I need evidence that will hold up in court. We have evidence, Jerome said, pushing forward the folder. Financial records, statements, witness testimony. And we have reason to believe that if you exhume Robert Chang's body and run a full toxicology screen, you'll find something interesting. Detective Morrison's eyebrows raised. You're asking me to authorize an exhumation? I'm saying that if you investigate this as a potential murder, you'll find enough evidence to prosecute. And that evidence will also prove the will is fraudulent. She studied us both for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll open an investigation. But understand this will take time. I can't make arrests based on what you've given me today. I need to build a case. We understand, I said. But you should know, we're going to court in 4 days for preliminary arguments on the estate. Whatever you find will matter. I'll do what I can. As we left the station, Jerome put his hand on my shoulder. You did good. Win or lose in civil court, if Morrison finds evidence of murder, Diane goes to prison. That's justice. But I didn't just want justice. I wanted everything back. My father's company. My home. My legacy. My life. 4 days until court. 4 days until everything changed. I spent those days preparing with Vanessa, going over testimony, reviewing evidence, practicing for cross-examination. Patricia flew back to Chicago to testify. Nicole took time off work to be there for moral support. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about my father. About how he'd tried to fix his mistake at the end. About how he'd trusted me with everything he'd built. I won't let you down, Dad, I whispered into the darkness. I promise. When morning came, I dressed in my best suit, navy blue, professional, powerful. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw my father's eyes looking back. Determined. Ready. It was time to take back what was mine. The Cook County Courthouse was everything I'd seen in movies, imposing marble, echoing hallways, the weight of justice pressing down from every corner. I walked through the metal detectors with Vanessa on one side and Patricia on the other, while Jerome and Nicole followed behind. Diane was already there with her legal team. 3 lawyers in expensive suits surrounded her, and she dressed for the part, conservative black dress, minimal jewelry, the perfect picture of a grieving widow. Brandon and Courtney flanked her, looking uncomfortable in formal clothes. When Diane saw me, her expression remained neutral, but I caught the flash of something in her eyes. Not fear anymore. Calculation. She had a plan. I just didn't know what it was yet. All rise for the Honorable Judge Maria Martinez. We stood as Judge Martinez entered. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie and seen every scam. Good. That's exactly what we needed. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of the estate of Robert Harrison, she began, looking over her glasses at both tables. I've reviewed the initial filings. Miss Pierce, you're representing the petitioner, Simone Harrison? Yes, Your Honor, Vanessa stood smoothly. We're here today to present evidence that the will currently being executed is fraudulent, and to introduce the legitimate will that names my client as the sole beneficiary of her father's estate. Diane's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Bennett, rose. Your Honor, this is an obvious attempt by a disgruntled daughter to overturn her father's clear wishes. The will in question was properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. My client is the widow of Robert Harrison, and she's following his explicit instructions. We'll see about that, Judge Martinez said dryly. Miss Pierce, present your evidence. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in legal strategy. Vanessa methodically laid out our case. First, Theodore Walsh's notes detailing my father's intentions and his concerns about Diane. Douglas tried to object, hearsay, but Vanessa countered that these were business records kept in the normal course of legal practice. Second, the February 28th will that my father had sent to Patricia. Douglas argued it was never properly executed, but Patricia's testimony was devastating. My brother called me in January, Patricia said from the witness stand, her voice clear and strong. He was distraught. He told me he'd made a terrible mistake marrying Diane, that she was manipulating him, isolating him from his family. He said he was changing his will to protect Simone and that he wanted me to keep a copy safe because he didn't trust Diane. Objection. Douglas jumped up. This is highly prejudicial testimony. Overruled, Judge Martinez said. The witness is describing a conversation with the deceased about his testamentary intent. Continue, Ms. Harrison. Patricia described receiving the will, having it authenticated by Theodore Walsh's office, keeping it secure. She showed the court the dated envelope it arrived in, postmarked 3 weeks before my father's heart attack. Douglas cross-examined aggressively. Ms. Harrison, isn't it true that you had been estranged from your brother for years? That you resented his new marriage? That's not true, Patricia said firmly. We were close until Diane systematically cut me out of his life. She intercepted my calls, told me I wasn't welcome at family events, poisoned my brother against his own family. But Robert saw through her eventually. That's why he reached out to me. Or that's what you want this court to believe so you and your niece can steal from the rightful heirs. The rightful heir is sitting right there. Patricia pointed at me. My brother's daughter. The woman he raised and loved and wanted to inherit his life's work. Next came the evidence about Robert Chong. Vanessa had Mrs. Chong testify via video conference, and her testimony was chilling. She described Diane's visit, the bribe attempt, her husband's fear, and his suspicious death. Douglas tried to shred her credibility. Mrs. Chong, you're asking this court to believe that my client murdered your husband over a will? That's absurd. I'm telling this court what my husband told me before he died, Mrs. Chong said steadily. He was scared. He said the woman offered him money to lie and when he refused, she threatened him. 3 days later he was dead. You call it absurd. I call it murder. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Chong, did your husband file a police report about this threat? He planned to. He was going to do it the day after his accident. Douglas pounced. So there's no official report. Just your word about what your husband allegedly told you. I have his written statement. Mrs. Chang's voice hardened. The one he gave me the night before he died, telling me everything about that meeting. The one describing your client perfectly. Vanessa submitted the statement as evidence. Douglas objected repeatedly, but Judge Martinez allowed it, noting that statements made in anticipation of danger could be admissible. Then came the forensic handwriting analysis. Our expert, Dr. Raymond Foster, was unshakable. The signature on the March 15th will show several irregularities, he explained, pointing to blown-up images on a screen. The pressure patterns are wrong for natural writing. The letter formations are too perfect, too controlled. This is someone carefully copying a signature, not someone signing their own name. Douglas brought his own expert who disputed the findings, claiming the variations could be explained by my father's illness. But Dr. Foster had anticipated this. Mr. Harrison's medical records show he had full motor control until his death, Dr. Foster countered. And look at these signatures from documents he signed 1 week before the alleged will: checks, business contracts, medical forms. All show his normal rushed signature pattern. The March 15th signature doesn't match. Finally, Vanessa played her ace, the hospital records. Your Honor, on March 15th, the date this will was allegedly signed and notarized, Robert Harrison was admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital at 9:47 a.m. following a heart attack. He remained there until 11:23 p.m. The will is timestamped 2:15 p.m. He was in the cardiac unit undergoing tests at that exact time. She submitted the medical records, patient logs, even the testimony of 2 nurses who remembered my father being there all day because he'd been kind to them, asking about their families despite his own pain. Douglas tried to suggest the timestamp was wrong, that the will could have been signed earlier or later. But Vanessa was ready. The notary log that was stolen from Robert Chang's office would have shown the exact time. But that log disappeared after Mr. Chang died. How convenient. By the time we broke for lunch, Diane's confidence had visibly cracked. She huddled with her lawyers, whispering urgently. Brandon looked sick. Courtney was crying quietly. I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with my team, barely able to eat. It's going well, Vanessa said. Better than well. Martinez is seeing through their lies. But is it enough? I asked. We're building reasonable doubt about the validity of their will while proving the legitimacy of ours. That's all we need at this stage. The afternoon session focused on the financial evidence. Jerome took the stand, explaining his investigation into Harrison Industries accounts. Over the past 3 years, approximately $478,000 was withdrawn from company accounts in a pattern suggesting embezzlement, he testified. The withdrawals were made through false vendor payments, inflated expense reports, and direct transfers to personal accounts. And whose accounts? Vanessa asked. Diane Harrison's, Brandon Fletcher's, and Courtney Fletcher's. The money was split among them. Douglas's cross-examination was fierce. Mr. Carter, isn't it true that you were hired by Miss Simone Harrison? That you're being paid to find evidence against my client? I'm being paid to find the truth, Jerome said calmly. And the truth is that your client has been stealing from Harrison Industries for years. The financial records don't lie. But your interpretation of those records could be biased. The forensic accountant who reviewed them independently came to the same conclusions. Would you like to call his testimony biased too? The forensic accountant, Philip Strauss, backed up every detail of Jerome's findings. By the end of his testimony, even Douglas looked worried. But Diane's team wasn't done. Douglas called his own witnesses friends of Diane's who testified that she and my father had a loving relationship, that my father had mentioned being disappointed in me, that he'd expressed concern about my ability to run the company. It was lies, all lies, but they were delivered with such sincerity that I felt my stomach turn. Then Douglas called Diane herself to the stand. She was perfect. Composed, tearful at the right moments, dignified. She talked about how much she'd loved my father, how devoted she'd been during his illness, how heartbroken she was that I was trying to destroy his memory with these accusations. Robert was very clear with me about his wishes, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He worried that Simone wasn't ready for the responsibility of running the company. He wanted to make sure I could protect his legacy and his business until Brandon was ready to take over. That's a lie. I whispered urgently to Vanessa. I know. Let me handle this. When it was Vanessa's turn to cross-examine, she didn't hold back. Mrs. Harrison, you testified that you loved your husband very much. Yes, I did. I do. Yet you isolated him from his family. From his sister Patricia, who he'd been close with his entire life. That's not true. Patricia didn't want anything to do with us. Really? Because we have phone records showing Patricia called your home 47 times over 5 years. 47 attempts to reach her brother. All blocked. We also have emails she sent to your shared email account that were never forwarded to Robert. Emails asking about him, expressing concern. Did Robert ever see those emails? Diane's composure slipped slightly. I don't recall. You don't recall intercepting communications between a man and his sister? Objection. Douglas stood. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, Miss Pierce. Mrs. Harrison, on March 15th, when your husband was in the hospital having a heart attack, where were you? I was there with him. All day. All day? The hospital logs show you left at 1:45 p.m. and didn't return until 10 p.m. Where did you go for those 8 hours? I had to take care of things at home. Brandon and Courtney needed me. Brandon and Courtney were 30 and 23 years old at the time. They needed you urgently enough that you left your husband's bedside during a health crisis? I needed a break. It was stressful. Stressful enough to visit Robert Chang during that time? To offer him $50,000 to falsify a document? The courtroom erupted. Douglas was shouting objections. Judge Martinez was banging her gavel. Diane had gone white as snow. That's a lie. Diane shrieked. I never went near that man. Then explain how your car was seen near his home at 2:30 p.m. that day. Explain how he wrote a detailed description of you, your car, your license plate before he died. Explain why he ended up dead 3 days later. Your Honor. Douglas was nearly purple with rage. This is outrageous. My client is not on trial for murder. No, Vanessa said coldly. Not yet. But the Chicago Police Department is investigating Robert Chang's death as a potential homicide. And when they're done, she might be. Judge Martinez called for order, threatening to clear the courtroom. When everyone finally settled down, she looked exhausted. We're going to take a recess, she said. When we return, I expect both counsels to conduct themselves professionally. This is not a television drama. During the recess, Diane's legal team looked frantic. They huddled in a corner, arguing in heated whispers. I saw Douglas throw his hands up in frustration at something Diane said. Nicole grabbed my hand. You're winning. You're actually winning. It's not over yet, I said, but I felt it too. The tide was turning. When court resumed, Douglas made a surprising move. Your Honor, in light of the serious allegations that have been raised, we request a continuance so that we can fully respond to this new evidence about Mr. Chang. Objection, Vanessa said immediately. The evidence about Mr. Chang has been available since we filed our initial petition. The defense has had time to prepare. Judge Martinez agreed. Denied. Let's proceed. The rest of the afternoon was more testimony, friends of my father's who spoke about his relationship with me, his plans for me to take over the company, his growing concerns about Diane. Each one was a nail in the coffin of her claims. By the time Judge Martinez gavelled the session to a close at 5 p.m., Diane looked like a different person. The mask had slipped. She looked old, scared, cornered. I'll review all evidence and testimony and issue my preliminary ruling within 72 hours, Judge Martinez said. Until then, all assets of the estate remain frozen. Court adjourned. As we walked out of the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Someone had leaked the details about the potential murder investigation, and now it was a media frenzy. Ms. Harrison, do you believe your stepmother murdered Robert Chang? Are you accusing your family of conspiracy? What's your response to claims that you're just a greedy daughter? Jerome and Nicole created a buffer while Vanessa made a brief statement. We're confident that justice will be served and that Robert Harrison's true wishes will be honored. That's all we have to say at this time. In the car, I finally let myself feel the exhaustion. Patricia held my hand. You did so well today, baby. So strong. Is it enough? I asked again. It has to be, Vanessa said. But prepare yourself. Even if we win the preliminary ruling, Diane will appeal. This could drag on for months. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not giving up. That night I couldn't sleep again. I kept replaying Diane's face when Vanessa mentioned the murder investigation. The fear. The rage. The realization that her perfect plan was falling apart. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're going to regret this. I showed it to Jerome immediately. He told me to forward it to Detective Morrison and to be careful. The threat was probably empty, but wounded animals were dangerous. 3 days later, Judge Martinez issued her ruling. Vanessa called me at 7 a.m., her voice jubilant. She's ruling in our favor. The March will is deemed fraudulent pending further investigation. Patricia's will is being recognized as the legitimate document. You're being reinstated as primary beneficiary of your father's estate. I couldn't breathe. We won. The preliminary ruling, yes. But Diane's team will appeal, and the criminal investigation is still ongoing. This isn't over. But Simone? You won. Your father's true wishes are being honored. I sat on my bed in my tiny apartment, tears streaming down my face. Dad had wanted me to have everything. And now, finally, the courts were listening. The next phase would be harder. Appeals, investigations, media scrutiny. But I'd already proven I could fight. And I was just getting started. The preliminary victory was sweet, but Vanessa warned me not to celebrate too early. Diane will appeal. She'll fight this with everything she has. And appeals can take years. But 2 things happened that changed everything. First, Detective Morrison called me in for another interview. We exhumed Robert Chang's body, she said without preamble. The original toxicology report was incomplete. The new screen found traces of succinylcholine, a paralytic drug. In high doses, it causes respiratory failure that looks like a heart attack or accident. My blood ran cold. Someone poisoned him. Someone injected him with a drug that would make his death look natural. The whiskey bottle in his car tested positive for the same drug. Someone spiked it, left it there, and made it look like drunk driving. Diane. We're building a case. But here's where it gets interesting. We also looked into Theodore Walsh's accident. Same story, his car went off the road, but witnesses said his vehicle seemed to accelerate before the crash, like he couldn't control it. We're examining his car now for evidence of tampering. I felt sick. 2 men, dead because they stood in Diane's way. And your father, Detective Morrison continued carefully. You mentioned his sudden heart attack? You think she killed him too? I think it's worth investigating. We'd need to exhume the body. The thought of disturbing my father's grave made me want to vomit. But if Diane had murdered him, do it, I said. Whatever it takes. The second thing that changed everything was Brandon. 3 days after Judge Martinez's ruling, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Simone. Brandon's voice was shaking. I need to talk to you. Alone. It's important. Every instinct told me it was a trap. But I was curious. Why would I trust anything you say? Because my mother is a murderer and I can't live with this anymore. We met in a coffee shop in Lakeview, neutral ground with plenty of witnesses. Jerome insisted on being there, sitting at a nearby table but close enough to intervene if necessary. Brandon looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. This wasn't the entitled, smug stepbrother I'd confronted in the house. This was someone who'd seen hell and couldn't unsee it. I didn't know, he said immediately. About the murders. I swear, Simone. I thought it was just the will, just estate planning. Mom said your dad had changed his mind about you, that he wanted us to have the business. I believed her. And you just went along with it? Didn't question why Dad would suddenly cut me out completely after 28 years? I wanted to believe it. His voice broke. I'm not proud of that. I wanted the money, the company. I was jealous of you my whole life. You were the smart one, the successful one, the one Robert actually loved. When Mom said he'd chosen us instead, I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. That's not good enough, Brandon. I know. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. But I'm here now. And I need to tell you everything. What he told me over the next hour was worse than I'd imagined. Diane had been planning the theft for 3 years, since my father first mentioned wanting to transition me into the CEO role. She'd been systematically embezzling money, hiding it in offshore accounts. She'd forged documents, manipulated records, poisoned relationships between my father and his business partners. She told us it was just borrowing, Brandon said. That Robert was too controlling with money, that we deserved more. She made it sound reasonable. But the murders, Brandon insisted he'd known nothing about those until after Robert Chang died. I found Mom's phone one night. She'd left it on the kitchen counter. I saw text messages to someone, just a number, no name. Instructions about making Chang's death look like an accident. Specific details about the drug to use, where to leave the whiskey bottle. Do you still have those messages? She deleted them. But I know who she was texting. A guy named Tony Moretti. He does work for people who need things done quietly. A hired killer. Diane had hired someone to murder Robert Chang and probably Theodore Walsh too. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Brandon's face crumpled. Because last night I heard her on the phone with Moretti again. She was talking about you, Simone. About making you go away. About staging another accident. The coffee shop suddenly felt too cold. She's going to kill me. I can't let that happen. Whatever else I've done, I can't be part of murder. So I'm here. I'll testify. I'll tell the police everything I know. I'll wear a wire, get Mom to confess, whatever you need. Just, please don't let her hurt you. I studied his face looking for the lie. But all I saw was fear and guilt and something that might have been genuine remorse. Why should I trust you? You could be wearing a wire right now for her. Brandon pulled out his phone and set it on the table. Check it. Search me if you want. I'm not working for her anymore. I'm done. Jerome came over and did exactly that, checked Brandon's phone, patted him down, even made him step outside while we searched his car. He was clean. He's telling the truth, Jerome said finally. Or he's a better actor than I think. I'm not acting, Brandon said when he came back. I know you have no reason to believe me. But I'm asking you to let me help fix this. Let me help put her away. I called Detective Morrison right there from the coffee shop. She arrived within 20 minutes and Brandon repeated everything he'd told me. Her expression grew more grim with each word. You understand you're confessing to knowledge of conspiracy to commit fraud? Morrison said. You could be charged. I understand. I'll take whatever punishment I deserve. But my mother can't get away with this. Morrison arranged for protective custody for Brandon. She was worried Diane would figure out he'd turned and try to silence him. Then she worked with the district attorney to set up a wire. The plan was simple. Brandon would go home and confront Diane about the murders. Get her to confess on tape. It was risky. If Diane suspected anything, Brandon could be in danger. But he insisted. I need to do this, he said. I need to make this right. 2 days later it was all set up. Brandon wore a wire hidden in his watch. Detectives waited in a van outside the house in Lincoln Park. I listened from the police station wearing a headset, my hands clenched so tight my nails drew blood. Brandon's voice came through, shaky but determined. Mom, we need to talk. Not now, Brandon. I'm meeting with Douglas about the appeal. It's about the appeal. About everything. Mom, I need to know the truth. Pause. Then Diane's voice, suspicious. What truth? Did you kill Robert Chong? The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, what are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous. I found your texts, Mom. The ones about making his death look like an accident. About the drug. I know you hired someone. You're being paranoid. The stress of the trial is getting to you. Stop lying. Brandon's voice cracked. I know what you did. I know you killed Theodore Walsh too. And now you're planning to kill Simone. Another long silence. When Diane spoke again, her voice had changed. Calculating. That little bitch has been a problem since the day I married Robert. Always in the way, always being perfect, always being Daddy's favorite. I gave 15 years of my life to this family, and I deserve that money. We deserve it. So you killed people for it? I did what I had to do. Chong was going to ruin everything by telling the truth. Walsh had already drafted that ridiculous will, leaving everything to Simone. They had to be dealt with. And Dad? Did you kill him too? A pause that felt like falling. Your stepfather was going to divorce me. Cut us off with nothing after 15 years. I couldn't let that happen. Oh my God. Mom, you murdered him. I saved our future. Diane's voice rose. I secured our future. And I would have gotten away with it if that ungrateful little witch hadn't started asking questions. But don't worry. Tony's taking care of her tonight. One more accident and all of this goes away. Tonight? Mom, what did you do? I told you. Tony's handling it. Simone's car is going to have a terrible accident on her way home from dinner. Brake failure. So tragic. Detective Morrison ripped off her headset. We need to move now. Where is Simone supposed to be tonight? I'm right here, I said, my voice shaking. But she thinks you're going to dinner. Who did she think you'd be with? My stomach dropped. Nicole. I was supposed to have dinner with Nicole tonight, but I canceled because of the wire operation. Call her. Now. I dialed Nicole's number with trembling hands. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. She's not answering. Morrison was already on her radio. All units, we need to locate Nicole Turner immediately. Black Honda Civic license plate. She looked at me. I rattled off Nicole's plate number, my mind racing with horror. Diane thought I was in Nicole's car. She'd sent her killer after my best friend. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Police units spread across the city looking for Nicole's car. I called her phone over and over, leaving frantic messages. Nicole, don't drive anywhere. Pull over. Call me. Please. At the house in Lincoln Park, SWAT moved in. They arrested Diane right there in her kitchen, still wearing her wire-caught confession. She didn't even try to fight it. She just looked at Brandon with pure hatred and said, "You betrayed me." "You're a murderer," Brandon said, and he was crying. "You killed people, Mom. How could you?" Courtney, who'd been upstairs and heard everything, came down screaming. "What's happening, Mom?" "Brandon, what did you do?" "He did the right thing," Detective Morrison said, slapping handcuffs on Diane. "Diane Harrison, you're under arrest for the murders of Robert Harrison, Theodore Walsh, and Robert Chong, and for conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." I barely heard the Miranda warning. All I could think about was Nicole. Where was she? Was she safe? Then my phone rang. "Nicole." "Oh, thank God," I sobbed into the phone. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "What's wrong? Why do you sound so upset?" "Where are you?" "At home." I wasn't feeling well, so I took the train instead of driving. My car's still parked at the office. Why? Relief made me dizzy. I explained everything, the wire, Diane's confession, the hit she'd ordered on my car thinking Nicole would be driving it. She tried to kill me? Nicole's voice was shaking now. She tried to kill me to get to you? The police are looking for the guy she hired. They have his name, Tony Moretti. They'll find him. They did 3 hours later. Tony Moretti was arrested trying to tamper with a car in the Harrison Industries parking lot, Nicole's car. He had tools, he had drugs, and when they searched him they found a photo of me with instructions written on the back. Make it look like brake failure. No witnesses. It was over. Diane was in jail, held without bail on multiple murder charges. Brandon was in protective custody, working with prosecutors. Courtney was a mess, claiming she knew nothing and maybe she really didn't. But she'd known enough to benefit from the fraud, and that made her complicit too. That night, I sat in the police station giving my formal statement, and all I could think about was my father. He'd known Diane was dangerous. He tried to protect me. But he hadn't moved fast enough, and it had cost him his life. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered. "I'm so sorry you were alone with her at the end." But he hadn't been alone. He'd left me evidence. He'd left me his sister. He'd left me everything I needed to expose the truth. And now, finally, justice was coming. The media exploded with the story. Society wife arrested for triple murder. Harrison Industries widow confesses to killing husband and others. The headlines were everywhere. I didn't read them. I didn't watch the news. I focused on what came next, rebuilding everything Diane had tried to destroy. The appeal Douglas had filed was withdrawn. The February will was fully validated. And I was officially named the sole beneficiary of my father's estate. Everything, the business, the house, the money, was mine. But it didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like I was standing in the wreckage of something that should never have been broken in the first place. Still I was standing. And Diane was in jail where she belonged. That had to count for something. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution had an overwhelming case, Diane's confession on tape, Brandon's testimony, financial records showing payments to Tony Moretti, forensic evidence from the exhumed body showing traces of succinylcholine in both Robert Chong and my father. Yes, they'd exhumed Dad's body. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever agreed to, but it was necessary. The toxicology report was definitive. My father had been poisoned with the same drug that killed Robert Chong. The heart attack hadn't been natural. It had been murder. I testified on the 4th day. Douglas Bennett had been replaced by a criminal defense attorney named Margaret Riley, a woman known for taking impossible cases. She cross-examined me aggressively. "Ms. Harrison, isn't it true that you benefited more than anyone from these supposed murders?" "I benefited from the truth coming out," I said steadily. "My father's real will being honored. But you gained millions of dollars and control of a company because these men died. Convenient, isn't it? What's convenient is that you're trying to blame the victim when your client confessed on tape to murdering 3 people. Judge Martinez sustained the objection Vanessa raised, but the point was made. They had nothing. No defense that could overcome a recorded confession. Brandon's testimony was devastating. He described the text messages he'd found, the conversations he'd overheard, the way Diane had manipulated him and Courtney for years. He cried on the stand when he talked about how she'd used their desire for acceptance and money to make them complicit in fraud. "I loved my mother," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't defend what she did. She killed people. She murdered her own husband for money. That's not love. That's evil." Courtney testified too, claiming ignorance of the murders but admitting she'd known about the forged will. "Mom said Robert wanted it that way," she insisted. "I didn't know she'd made it all up." The jury didn't believe her. How could they? The evidence was overwhelming. Tony Moretti cut a deal 20 years in exchange for testimony against Diane. He described in chilling detail how she'd hired him to take care of problems. How she'd given him specific instructions about making deaths look accidental. How she'd paid him in cash and cryptocurrency to avoid paper trails. She was smart, Moretti said from the stand. Cold. She knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. No emotion, no hesitation. Just business. The most damning testimony came from the medical examiner who'd re-examined my father's body. Dr. Susan Park explained how succinylcholine worked, how it caused paralysis and respiratory failure, how it metabolized quickly and could be missed in standard toxicology screens. "But we found traces in Mr. Harrison's liver tissue," she said. "Traces that prove he was poisoned. Given the timing, the sudden heart attack right before he was going to change his will, and the defendant's means, motive, and opportunity, I believe Robert Harrison was murdered by his wife. I sat in the courtroom every day watching Diane. She never looked at me. Never showed emotion. She sat rigid in her chair, occasionally whispering to her lawyer, but mostly just staring straight ahead like she was somewhere else entirely. On the 17th day, the prosecution rested. Margaret Riley put up a weak defense. Character witnesses who said Diane was a good person. Attempts to discredit Brandon's testimony. Suggestions that Tony Moretti was lying to save himself. But it wasn't enough. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the foreperson stood and read the verdict. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Harrison, guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Theodore Walsh, guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Chong, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the count of solicitation of murder, guilty. 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 The word echoed through the courtroom like a bell tolling. Diane didn't react. She just sat there, expressionless, as the judge thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. I felt Patricia's hand squeeze mine. Nicole was crying. Jerome nodded at me with satisfaction. Vanessa looked grimly pleased. But I felt empty. Yes, justice had been served. Yes, Diane would pay for what she'd done. But my father was still dead. Theodore Walsh was still dead. Robert Chong was still dead. And no verdict could bring them back. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a brief statement that Vanessa had prepared. Today, justice was served for my father, Robert Harrison, and for Theodore Walsh and Robert Chong. These men died because they stood in the way of someone's greed. I'm grateful to the jury for seeing through the lies and recognizing the truth. My focus now is on honoring my father's memory and continuing his legacy. Questions were shouted at me. How do you feel about your stepbrother testifying against his mother? Will you pursue civil charges against Courtney Fletcher? What's next for Harrison Industries? I didn't answer any of them. I just walked to the car with my people around me, Patricia, Nicole, Jerome, Vanessa, and let them drive me home. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The prosecution asked for life without parole on each murder count, to run consecutively. Margaret Riley argued for concurrent sentences, claiming Diane was a first-time offender who'd acted out of fear and desperation. Judge Martinez wasn't buying it. Mrs. Harrison, she said, looking directly at Diane, you systematically planned and executed the murders of 3 men to steal an inheritance that was never yours. You poisoned your husband, the man who trusted you, loved you, and gave you a home. You had 2 men killed who were simply doing their jobs honestly. You tried to have your stepdaughter murdered to cover your crimes. You showed no remorse, no conscience, no humanity. She paused, letting the words sink in. I'm sentencing you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of first-degree murder, to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your life in prison where you belong. 3 consecutive life sentences. Diane would die in prison. She was led away in handcuffs, finally showing emotion rage. She turned and looked at me for the first time since the trial began. This should have been mine, she screamed. 15 years I gave to that man. 15 years. I earned it. You earned nothing, I said quietly, but she heard me. You stole everything and now you've lost everything. Including your freedom. They took her away still screaming. Courtney was charged as an accessory to fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison. She sobbed through the entire proceeding, claiming she was a victim too. Maybe in some ways she was. But she'd known the will was fake and gone along with it anyway. Brandon got immunity for his testimony, but he'd never be the same. He'd turned on his mother to save his own soul, and he'd have to live with that forever. I saw him once after the trial outside the courthouse. Thank you, I said, for doing the right thing. He nodded, looking older than his 30 years. It doesn't feel right. It just feels necessary. I'm sorry, Simone. For everything. For being part of it, for not questioning it, for benefiting from your pain. What will you do now? I don't know. Maybe therapy. Maybe try to become someone my stepfather would have been proud of, even though I never gave him a reason to be. He paused. For what it's worth, he loved you so much. He talked about you constantly. I was jealous, but I understood it. You were worth loving. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded and we went our separate ways. I never saw him again. With the criminal trial concluded, the civil matters resolved quickly. The March will was permanently invalidated. The February will was enforced. Everything my father had built, Harrison Industries, the house in Lincoln Park, his investments, his savings, came to me. I was worth over $40 million. But more than the money, I had my father's legacy. His company. His dream. His trust in me to carry it forward. And I intended to honor that trust. The day I walked back into Harrison Industries as its new CEO was surreal. Employees who'd been told I was incompetent, who'd been fed lies about me for months, now looked at me with respect and something like awe. The company had suffered under Diane's mismanagement. She'd been embezzling so much money that several departments were underfunded. Vendor relationships were strained. Morale was low. I spent the first month just assessing the damage and talking to people. I met with every department head, every team leader, every longtime employee who'd worked with my father. I listened to their concerns, their ideas, their fears. We didn't know, one of the VPs told me, about the embezzlement, about the fraud. We thought you just left after your father died. We thought you didn't want to be here anymore. That's what Diane wanted you to think, I said. But I'm here now. And we're going to rebuild this company together, the way my father would have wanted. It wasn't easy. There were financial holes to fill, contracts to renegotiate, trust to rebuild. But I'd been trained by the best. My father had taught me everything about this business, about leadership, about integrity. And I wasn't alone anymore. Patricia became my advisor, bringing her social work background to help me think about corporate culture and employee well-being. Nicole joined the company as my COO, bringing fresh perspectives and loyalty I could count on. Jerome came on as head of security, making sure we never had another Diane situation. Within 6 months, Harrison Industries was profitable again. Within a year, we'd expanded into new markets and doubled our revenue. Within 2 years, we were one of the most respected manufacturers in our sector. But more than the success, I changed the company's mission. I established the Robert Harrison Foundation, using company profits to support causes Dad had cared about. Education for underprivileged youth, support for widows and widowers dealing with grief, and victims advocacy for people dealing with estate fraud. I also made sure that Robert Chang's widow and Theodore Walsh's family received settlements from Diane's seized assets. It wouldn't bring their loved ones back, but it was something. The house in Lincoln Park, I sold it. I couldn't live there, couldn't walk through rooms where Diane had plotted murder and my father had been poisoned. I bought a new place in the West Loop, modern and bright with no ghosts. But I kept my father's office from the old house. His desk, his chair, his books. I installed them in my new office at Harrison Industries, and sometimes when I was working late, I'd look up and almost see him sitting across from me, smiling that proud smile he used to give me. 3 years after Diane's conviction, I stood at my father's grave on the anniversary of his death. The headstone was simple: Robert Harrison, beloved father, visionary leader, man of integrity. I placed flowers, the yellow roses he'd loved, and spoke to him the way I had when he was alive. I did it, Dad. I saved the company. I found the truth. I made her pay for what she did to you. I paused, tears running down my face. I wish you were here to see it. To see what I've built. But I know you know. Somehow, I know you know. The wind rustled through the trees and I felt peace. Not happiness, not yet. The grief was still there, would always be there. But peace. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. And I was finally free from Diane's shadow. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was Jerome. Hey boss, we have a problem. I smiled. There was always a problem. That's what made life interesting. Tell me everything, I said, and got in my car to head back to the office. My office. My company. My legacy. Everything my father had wanted me to have. The office was nothing like I remembered. Not the physical space that hadn't changed. The factory floor still hummed with machinery, the conference room still overlooked the Chicago skyline, the break room still smelled like bad coffee. But the atmosphere was different. Lighter. Hopeful. I'd spent the past year systematically transforming Harrison Industries from the inside out. First order of business, rooting out anyone who'd been complicit in Diane's schemes. The CFO who'd looked the other way during the embezzlement? Gone. The VP of operations who'd helped spread lies about my competence? Gone. The HR director who'd blocked my emails and calls? Gone. I didn't fire them out of spite. I fired them because a company built on my father's integrity couldn't keep people who'd traded that integrity for convenience. In their places, I brought in new talent. Young, hungry, ethical people who wanted to build something meaningful. And the old guard who'd stayed loyal to my father's vision, I promoted them, listened to their ideas, made them part of the leadership team. Within 6 months, Harrison Industries had undergone a complete cultural transformation. It's like working at a different company, one of the engineers told me during a town hall meeting. For the first time in years, I feel proud to be here. That's what I wanted. Pride. Purpose. The feeling that we were building something that mattered. The financials reflected the change. In my first full year as CEO, revenue increased by 35%. We landed 3 major contracts that had been circling but uncommitted during Diane's tenure. Our employee retention rate jumped from 62% to 94%. But the transformation wasn't just about numbers. It was about reclaiming my father's vision. Dad had always believed that business should benefit everyone, not just shareholders but employees, customers, and communities. Under Diane's management, that vision had been forgotten in favor of profit extraction and personal enrichment. I brought it back. We established a profit-sharing program so that when the company did well, everyone benefited. We created apprenticeship programs with local high schools, giving kids from underserved neighborhoods a path into skilled trades. We partnered with women's shelters and veterans organizations, providing job training and employment opportunities. The Robert Harrison Foundation became my passion project. With Nicole managing the day-to-day operations and Patricia serving as board chair, we'd helped over 200 families dealing with estate fraud navigate the legal system. We'd provided full scholarships to 50 students. We'd supported 20 widows and widowers through their grief with counseling and financial planning. Your father would be so proud, Patricia said during our quarterly board meeting. This is exactly what he dreamed of, using success to create opportunity for others. But success brought its own challenges. The media attention from Diane's trial had made Harrison Industries a household name. We were getting interview requests, documentary proposals, even a streaming service that wanted to make a series about the Harrison inheritance murder. I turned them all down. This wasn't entertainment. These were real people who died. Still, the visibility brought opportunities. Larger clients who'd never considered us before were now requesting proposals. Investors were interested in funding expansion. We had options we'd never had before. It also brought unwanted attention. Simone, we need to talk about security, Jerome said during one of our weekly meetings. He'd become more than just an investigator, he was now chief security officer and one of my closest advisors. You're a high-profile CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. You're young, successful, and you inherited everything after a very public murder trial. That makes you a target. A target for what? Opportunists, scammers, people who think they can sue you for something and get a settlement. And worse, people who might try to harm you for attention or money. I thought about Diane's attempt on my life 3 years ago. The hired killer waiting in the parking lot. How close I'd come to dying. What do you suggest? Upgraded security at your home and office. A driver instead of you driving yourself. Background checks on anyone who gets close to you personally. And he hesitated. You need to be careful about dating. I laughed, but it was hollow. Dating? I haven't had time to date in 3 years. Exactly. And when you do, people are going to see dollar signs. You need to be careful. He wasn't wrong. Since taking over Harrison Industries, my personal life had been non-existent. I worked 12-hour days, attended board meetings and strategy sessions, traveled to meet with clients and partners. By the time I got home each night, I was too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Nicole tried to set me up a few times. You can't work yourself to death, she insisted. Your father wouldn't want that. My father worked constantly, I pointed out. And he missed out on a lot of life because of it. Don't make the same mistake. But who could I trust? How would I know if someone liked me for me or for the fortune I represented? The inheritance had made me wealthy, but it had also made me isolated. Patricia worried about me too. Baby girl, you need more than just work. You need connections. Family. Joy. I have family. I have you. You do. And we've been working on something I think you'll appreciate. The following summer, Patricia organized the first Harrison family reunion since my father's death. We rented a lodge in Michigan, and for one long weekend, I met dozens of cousins, aunts, uncles, and extended family I'd never known. It was overwhelming and wonderful. They all had stories about my father, about his childhood, his wild teenage years, his first business ventures. They had stories about my mother too, about her kindness and humor and the way she brought light into every room. And they all had questions for me. What was I like? What did I love? What did I dream about? I realized I'd been so focused on being CEO, on honoring my father's legacy, on fixing what Diane had broken, that I'd forgotten to just be Simone. That weekend, I laughed more than I had in years. I played games with my younger cousins. I listened to my grandmother's sister tell embarrassing stories about my dad. I learned to fish from Uncle Marcus, not Marcus as in the band name, but my actual uncle on Dad's side. I I felt like part of something bigger than myself. This is what family feels like, I told Patricia as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. Real family. This is what your father wanted for you. Connection. Belonging. Love that doesn't come with conditions or ulterior motives. The reunion became an annual tradition. Every summer we'd gather in Michigan. Every summer the extended Harrison family would come together, and I'd feel less alone. But I was still lonely. Not for family, I had that now. But for partnership. For someone to share the journey with. That's when Jerome Carter became more than just my security officer. It started small. He'd make me laugh during tense board meetings with a quiet comment only I could hear. He'd remember that I hated black coffee and always had my preferred vanilla latte waiting in my office. He'd text me articles he thought I'd find interesting, or memes that poked fun at corporate culture. You're one of the few people who sees me as just Simone, I told him one evening when we were working late on a security audit. Not as Robert Harrison's daughter or the CEO or the woman who survived a murder conspiracy. Just me. That's because you are just you, he said simply. All that other stuff is what you do, not who you are. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. We didn't rush into anything. We were both cautious, me because of the trust issues Diane had given me, him because he took his professional responsibility seriously. But over months, friendship deepened into something more. Our first official date was appropriately us. Takeout in my office at 10 p.m. while reviewing quarterly reports. Romantic? Not exactly. But it was real. Honest. Built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I'm not interested in your money, Jerome told me early on. I make good money. I have my own investments. I don't need yours. I know, I said. And I did know. Jerome had proven himself long before we started dating. He'd helped me when I had nothing. He'd risked his reputation investigating my case. He'd become my friend before anything else. Patricia loved him. That man looks at you like you're the only person in the room, she said approvingly. Like my brother used to look at your mother. Nicole was more direct. About damn time you found someone who deserves you. Dating the security officer was unconventional, but that's what made it work. Jerome understood the pressures of my position because he was part of the business. He understood the security concerns because he managed them. He understood my goals because he'd been there since the beginning of this journey. And he made me laugh. Real laughter, not polite business laughter. He'd send me ridiculous security memos just to see me smile. He'd plan surprise date nights where we do normal things, movies, concerts, walks along the lakefront, away from the corporate world. You need to remember you're human, he'd say. Not just a CEO. 2 years into dating he proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant or on a grand vacation. He proposed in my office at Harrison Industries, in front of my father's old desk. Your dad told me once, during our investigation, that his biggest dream was seeing you happy and successful, Jerome said, down on one knee. He'd be so proud of what you've built. But I think what would make him happiest is seeing you truly happy. Not just successful. Happy. I want to spend my life making sure you're both. Will you marry me? I said yes through tears. The wedding was small, just family and close friends at the lodge in Michigan during the summer reunion. Patricia walked me down the aisle. Nicole was my maid of honor. And my father's favorite cousin sang the same song that had been played at my parents' wedding. I wore my mother's earrings. Jerome wore cufflinks that had belonged to my father. Patricia had saved them and gave them to him as a wedding gift. Your parents would have loved him, she told me as she helped me get ready. He's exactly the kind of man they would have wanted for you. Good, honest, strong, and kind. The business continued to thrive. With Jerome as a full partner in life and a trusted advisor in business, Harrison Industries expanded into new markets. We opened a second manufacturing facility. We developed innovative products that revolutionized our sector. We became known not just for quality products but for ethical business practices. Industry magazines did profiles on my unconventional rise and transformational leadership. I was invited to speak at conferences about navigating family business dynamics and ethical corporate governance. Harvard Business School asked me to guest lecture. But the achievement I was proudest of had nothing to do with profit margins or industry recognition. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Mrs. Chong, Robert's widow. Dear Simone, it read. Thank you. Thank you for not letting my husband's death be in vain. Thank you for fighting for the truth. Thank you for the settlement from your stepmother's seized assets. It allowed me to pay off our mortgage and send my youngest to college. But most of all, thank you for creating the foundation that helped me through the legal process of seeking justice. Because of you, Robert's death meant something. Because of you, Other families won't have to suffer alone the way I did. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. I cried when I read it. Not sad tears. Grateful tears. Everything we'd been through, the investigation, the trial, the transformation of the company, it had meant something. It had helped people. That's what success really looked like. Not just financial prosperity but meaningful impact. Lives changed. Justice served. Good created from terrible tragedy. My father had built a company on integrity. I was building a legacy on justice. And I was just getting started. 5 years after Judge Martinez sentenced Diane to life in prison, I stood in front of a crowd of 2,000 people at the opening gala for the Robert Harrison Center for Justice. The center was my proudest achievement, a state-of-the-art facility that provided free legal services, counseling, and support for families dealing with estate fraud, financial exploitation of the elderly, and inheritance theft. It had taken 3 years to plan, build, and staff, but now it was real. A permanent testament to my father's values and a practical resource for people who needed help. My father always believed that business should serve the community, I said into the microphone, looking out at the crowd of donors, politicians, community leaders, and the families we'd already helped. He believed that success without purpose was just accumulation. He believed in justice, in integrity, in using what you have to help those who don't have enough. I glanced at the front row where Patricia sat with Jerome, Nicole, and several of my cousins from the extended Harrison family I'd come to love. 5 years ago, I learned that my father's trust in me came with a terrible cost. People died to steal what should have been mine, not the money but the opportunity to honor his legacy. But from that tragedy came purpose. The Robert Harrison Center for Justice exists because of what my father built and what he believed in. It exists to make sure that other families don't suffer alone when they face betrayal and fraud. The crowd applauded. I saw tears in Patricia's eyes. Jerome gave me an encouraging nod. I continued, telling the story carefully, not sensationalizing, not dramatizing, just honest. I talked about Diane's manipulation and murder. About the investigation and trial. About rebuilding the company and finding my purpose. About turning pain into purpose. The best revenge, I said, isn't destruction. It's building something better than what they tried to take from you. It's living so well, so purposefully, so successfully that their betrayal becomes nothing but a footnote in your story of triumph. More applause. I saw Mrs. Chong in the audience, smiling through tears. She'd become a volunteer at the center, using her experience to help others navigate similar tragedies. After the speeches, the gala moved into celebration mode. Music, dancing, networking. I worked the room, thanking donors, listening to stories from families we'd helped, planning for the future. You did good, baby girl, Patricia said when we had a quiet moment. Your father is smiling down on you right now. I hope so. I hope he knows that everything he built is safe. That his legacy lives on. He knows. Later that evening, Jerome and I escaped to the balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city glittered below us, alive with possibility. How do you feel? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Complete, I said honestly. For the first time since Dad died, I feel complete. You've accomplished everything you set out to do. You saved the company. You exposed Diane. You created something meaningful from tragedy. What's next? I thought about that. What was next? Harrison Industries was thriving. We'd just completed our most profitable quarter ever. The center was open and helping people. My marriage was strong. My family connections were deep and real. I'd written a book about business ethics that had become required reading in several MBA programs. I'd been invited to join corporate boards and industry organizations. From the outside, my life looked perfect. And in many ways it was. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. I want to expand the center nationally, I said. There are families in every city dealing with the same issues we faced. I want to build centers in 10 cities within 5 years. I want to create a network of support so that no one has to fight alone. Jerome smiled. Of course you do. You can't just be successful. You have to change the world. Is that a criticism? It's why I love you. The expansion plan was ambitious, but I'd proven I could do ambitious things. Within a year, we'd opened centers in New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. Within 3 years, we had locations in 10 major cities. Each one staffed by lawyers, counselors, and advocates dedicated to fighting inheritance fraud and exploitation. The media called me the anti-fraud crusader. Forbes did a cover story titled, How Simone Harrison Turned Murder and Betrayal into a Mission for Justice. I was invited to testify before Congress about needed reforms to probate laws and estate protection. All of it felt right. Like I was finally doing what I was meant to do all along. But I also made sure to live. Really live. Jerome and I traveled, not for business but for pleasure. We spent 2 weeks in Italy, eating amazing food and seeing art. We went to Japan and marveled at the culture. We visited Patricia in Phoenix and spent lazy days by her pool talking about everything and nothing. We talked about having kids. Maybe adopting. Giving a child the kind of love and security I'd almost lost. Your father would have been an amazing grandfather, Jerome said one night as we discussed the possibility. He would have spoiled them rotten, I agreed. And taught them everything about business and integrity and fighting for what's right. We decided to wait another year or two. We weren't in a rush. We had time. Meanwhile, Diane remained in prison. I received occasional updates. She'd been involved in a fight with another inmate. She'd been denied parole eligibility. Not that she had any chance given her consecutive life sentences. She'd filed appeals that were quickly denied. I never visited her. Never wrote to her. Never acknowledged her existence beyond what was legally required. Brandon had moved to Seattle and was working as a financial counselor for a nonprofit. He turned his guilt and shame into purpose, helping people avoid the kind of financial manipulation his mother had engaged in. We exchanged emails occasionally, but we weren't close. Too much history, too much pain. Courtney was released from prison after serving 2 years of her 3-year sentence. She tried to reach out to me several times asking for help, for money, for a job. I'd blocked her every time. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. She'd known the will was fake and benefited from it anyway. That was enough for me to cut her out of my life permanently. Do you ever feel guilty about that? Nicole asked once. About not giving her a second chance? No, I said simply. Second chances are for people who actually regret what they did. Courtney regrets getting caught, not the actions themselves. There's a difference. The 10th anniversary of my father's death was approaching. A decade since he'd died. 5 years since Diane had been convicted. 3 years since the center opened. A decade of loss, revelation, justice, and rebuilding. I planned a memorial service at the center, a celebration of his life and legacy. We invited everyone who'd known him. Business partners, old friends, the extended Harrison family, employees who'd worked with him for years. The turnout was overwhelming. Over 500 people came to honor Robert Harrison's memory and see what his legacy had become. I stood in front of that crowd again, older now, confident in a way I hadn't been when this all started. My father died believing he'd failed me, I said. Believing he'd let a manipulative woman isolate me and set me up for loss. But he didn't fail me. He left me everything I needed to fight back and win. He left me evidence. He left me family I didn't know I had. He left me his values and his vision. And most importantly, he left me an example of how to live with integrity even when others don't. I looked at Patricia, who was crying openly now. At Jerome, who looked at me with such love it made my heart ache. At Nicole, who'd been with me through every step of this journey. At the faces of people I'd helped through the center, people who'd survived their own betrayals. The best way to honor someone's memory isn't to hold on to grief. It's to take what they gave you and build something that makes the world better. My father gave me his company, his values, his trust. I've tried to take those gifts and create something that would make him proud. After the service, as people mingled and shared stories, Jerome pulled me aside. There's something I want to show you. He led me to a wall in the center I hadn't noticed before. A new installation. In elegant bronze letters, it read, "In memory of Robert Harrison, Theodore Walsh, and Robert Chung, men of integrity who paid the ultimate price for truth." Below their names were their photos and brief descriptions of their lives and deaths. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and perfect. Every person who comes through these doors will see this, Jerome said. Will know what they stood for and what it cost them. Your father's name will be remembered not for how he died, but for what he believed in. I couldn't speak. I just stood there crying, staring at my father's photo. He looked so young in that picture, so full of life and hope. I miss him, I whispered. I know, Jerome said, holding me. But look at what you've built in his name. Look at all the people you've helped. That's not just remembering him. That's keeping him alive. He was right. That night, I went to my father's grave. I did this every year on the anniversary, but this time felt different. Final, somehow. I did it, Dad, I told him, sitting on the grass next to his headstone. I saved the company. I exposed Diane and her crimes. I built the center. I married a good man who would have made you proud. I reconnected with your family. I turned everything you left me into something that matters. The wind rustled through the trees like it had 5 years ago, and I smiled through my tears. I'm happy now. Really happy. Not just successful or accomplished, but genuinely happy. I wake up every day with purpose. I go to bed every night knowing I've helped someone. I have love, family, meaningful work. Everything you wanted for me. I placed yellow roses on his grave the way I'd done every year. Diane lost everything. She's in prison for life. Brandon is trying to be better. Courtney is on her own. And me? I'm thriving. Not despite what happened, but because of how I chose to respond to it. I stood up, brushing grass from my jeans. Thank you for being my father. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for leaving me the tools I needed to fight back. And thank you for teaching me that success means nothing if it doesn't serve something greater than yourself. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter. Like I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for a decade. The story that started with betrayal and murder had ended with justice and purpose. And I was no longer defined by what Diane tried to take from me. I was defined by what I'd built from the ashes of her destruction. 3 months later, I received an envelope in the mail. Prison stationery. From Diane. I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity won out. Inside was a single page, Diane's handwriting. Simone, I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed my life, turned my son against me, and taken everything. I hope the money makes you happy. You may have won in court, but you'll never be anything more than the daughter who couldn't let go of her dead father's approval. I pity you. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I laughed. This was what defeat looked like. A bitter woman in a prison cell, trying to hurt me with words because she had nothing else left. I pulled out a piece of my personal stationery and wrote back. Diane, I won't pretend to pity you because I don't. You made your choices. You murdered 3 men, including the man who loved you and gave you everything. You tried to murder me. You stole years of my life through manipulation and lies. You earned every day of your prison sentence. But I need you to understand something. I'm not satisfied because you're in prison. I'm satisfied because I built something beautiful from the ruins you created. I'm married to a man who loves me for who I am, not what I have. I run a company that employs thousands of people and does good work in the world. I've helped hundreds of families avoid the fate you tried to force on me. I don't need my dead father's approval. I have his legacy, his values, and his love, which is more than you ever understood or deserved. You didn't teach me how to hate. You taught me how to fight. You taught me how to recognize manipulation and lies. You taught me that success isn't about what you accumulate but about what you build for others. So thank you, Diane. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Because defeating you and everything you represent has been the making of me. I won't write again. You're not worth my time or energy. But I wanted you to know, I'm happy. Deeply, genuinely happy. And there's nothing you can do about it. Simone Harrison Carter. Note the last name. I kept my father's legacy while building my own. I mailed the letter and never thought about Diane again. Because that's what real victory looks like. Not hatred. Not revenge. Not constant vigilance against an enemy. Real victory is moving forward so completely that your enemies become irrelevant. Their names become footnotes. Their actions become cautionary tales. Their destruction of themselves is their own punishment. 5 years became 10 years became 15. Harrison Industries continued to grow and thrive. The Centers for Justice expanded to 20 cities and helped thousands of families. Jerome and I adopted 2 children, a girl and a boy, who filled our home with laughter and chaos and unconditional love. Patricia remained my advisor and confidant until she passed peacefully at 85, surrounded by family, having lived a full and happy life. The extended Harrison family became my anchor. Annual reunions grew to include our children's generation. The legacy continued. And me? I became the woman my father hoped I'd be. Not just successful but purposeful. Not just wealthy but generous. Not just accomplished but happy. The girl who sat in that lawyer's office at 28, learning her entire life had been stolen, had become a woman who'd taken that theft and transformed it into triumph. That was the final victory. Not Diane's imprisonment. Not the money or the company or the public recognition. The final victory was building a life so full of love, purpose, and meaning that the betrayal became just a chapter in my story, not the whole book. My father had wanted me to have everything he'd built. But what he really gave me was the tools to build something even better. And I did.